Going live in 3, 2, and 1. Greetings and a warm welcome to the Australia-China Media Watch podcast. We're looking specifically at news coverage from the Global Times and Sky News Australia, starting from Monday 15th of November to Sunday the 21st of November. From the Global Times, there were 17 instances of Australia being mentioned in their media coverage. Sky News Australia had a grand total of 84 instances. Let's start unpacking, beginning with the Global Times. Published on the 15th of November, Liberals' fear-mongering won't be effective, according to former Australian diplomat. The next occurrence was also published on the 15th of November. Headline reads, Support for Australian PM hits 18-month low. Originally published in Reuters and then republished in the Global Times. Published on the 16th of November. Headline reads, US Indo-Pacific strategy lacks economic pillars, hardly to win hearts in Southeast Asia. For context, let's dive into the article. And the mention of Australia appears in the penultimate paragraph. After the US, the UK and Australia announced the AUKUS Security Pact, countries like Indonesia and Malaysia have expressed a concern that such a move would trigger a regional arms race. Published on the 16th of November, a photo story where upon closer inspection, there seems to be more than meets the eye. So here we have a photograph of New Year and Christmas themed decorations in Melbourne. And encoded into the messaging is this correlation between Melbourne and how in Melbourne coronavirus caused the highest number of deaths and cases in Australia during a time of preparation to normalize life in the city centre where the virus hit. Published on November 17th. Morrison's bellicose foreign policy faces declining approval rate. Also on November 17th, with eye on China, US-Japan stage anti-submarine drills in South China Sea. For a bit more further unpacking, we'll be heading into the article. And mention of Australia. However, Song pointed out that the US and Japan's attempt to hunt PLA submarines, be they conventional or nuclear powered, is a daydream, as the South China Sea is too big for these few countries, even counting the naval forces of Australia, not to mention that increasingly advanced submarine technologies that China possesses. This next one was published on November 18th by the editor of the Global Times. Headline reads, In the face of an irrational Australia, shouldn't China be prepared with an iron fist? Published also on November 18th. The headline of this article reads, After China-US leaders meeting, other Western nations may seek similar talks, according to experts. Let's dive into the article to further unpack Australia's role in this. Following the meeting, certain Australian officials also expressed desire for meetings with Chinese officials, according to media reports. praising the China-US leaders meeting as being meaningful and significant. Australia's trade minister said that's what Australia wants to do with China itself. We are looking for constructive engagement. This signals from the EU and Australia may reflect a certain turn in the attitude of US allies towards China, experts said, as they hope that the virtual meeting between Chinese and US top leaders could provide an opportunity for others to pursue similar dialogues with China. Chen Hong, Executive Director of Asia Pacific Studies Center under East China Normal University, said that Australia was stuck in a somewhat awkward position after the US, which it is following in targeting China, has turned to seek to ease tensions in bilateral ties. The next article has the headline, GT Voice, Australia has no strength to counter rising Chinese technology. The next article, which was also published on 18th of November, cites Australia as an example in a functional way. So I'm discounting that in the scheme of the Global Times making use of their content in constructing a discursive practice as a form of soft power. So of the 17 articles, this is one out of 3 or 4 of the 17 that cite Australia in a somewhat neutral way. Moving on to the next, smart techs. This next headline reads, smart technologies to shield foreign reporters against COVID-19 during Beijing Winter Olympics. This article too cites Australia in a neutral, factual way. Moving along to the next, Aboriginal heritage law falls short, according to an investor body. This was published on the 18th of November as well, and we'll head in there to further unpack what the article is about. So, useful to note, it was originally published by Reuters, and this paper looks at how there is new Western Australian legislation to better protect Aboriginal heritage and how this falls short of international standards. And a look at the concluding paragraph states that an Australian inquiry into the incident has recommended a new national legal framework and for Aboriginal people to be the top decision makers on heritage issues. So attempts to paint two sides to a coin. Aboriginal law falls short, investor body. We move on to the next article, which is now published on the 19th of November. Headline reads, Unity is the cornerstone of ASEAN centrality. So as we head into the article to further unpack the role of Australia in this, it looks like this article is based on the commemoration of the 30th anniversary of ASEAN-China dialogue relations. So Australia is mentioned here specifically in relation to the AUKUS agreement, which has given a green light to providing nuclear submarines to Australia, triggering a potential nuclear arms race in the region, when ASEAN has made it clear that they do not want to see an arms race to threaten the stability of the region. Published on November 19th, headline reads, Aussie iron ore exports expected to fall until Q1 of 2022 amid China's control and supply diversification. The next headline, China ASEAN expected to upgrade ties to comprehensive strategic partnership at special summit as US provocation fails in the region. Gonna head into the article to further unpack the role of Australia in this. So the summit follows a virtual meeting between leaders of China and the US, which prompted some US allies, such as Australia, to begin to adjust their own China approach by seeking dialogue with China. The next mentioned, many Western media reported it by linking it with a similar partnership ASEAN reached with Australia, saying Australia beat China to get such a deal. China supported the pilot role of ASEAN in regional cooperation, which has expanded from ASEAN Plus 1 to the ASEAN Plus 6 group, namely 10 ASEAN countries, members, and 6 countries in the region: Australia, China, India, Japan, South Korea, and New Zealand. And China-ASEAN relations have injected confidence into regional and even global development. No more mentions in this article. We'll move on to the next mention of Australia, and this one was a functional use of Australia, looking at the World Cup qualifiers between Team China and Australia. So that's the third article out of the 17 in which Australia was cited for purely functional purposes and not quite part of discursive practice as a soft power technique. Published on the 19th of November, and this concludes our look at the Global Times. This is an opinion / viewpoint. How the US, this headline reads, how the US betrayed 3 joint communiques with China. I'm not sure if I got the pronunciation of that correct. With China over Taiwan question. Having a look at the opening paragraph, the relationship of the People's Republic of China to the US enjoyed a glorious beginning and promising friendship, and a brief history can clarify what has gone wrong since. So a further probe into mentions of Australia, and looks like it's been provided in the footnotes. So Australia's membership with the AUKUS and the Quad, the Australia Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. Further mentions of it, that's it. And there we go, everybody. A look at Global Times coverage of Australia from the 15th of November to Sunday, the 21st of November. We're going to turn our attention over to Sky News Australia. So there were a total of 84 results for China from the dates 15th of November to Sunday 21st of November. Let's begin to unpack these. So published on the 15th in relation to global affairs. Headline reads, COP26 deal overshadowed by last-minute interventions from China and India. A historic climate deal reached at the climate summit has been overshadowed by last-minute intervention from these 2 countries. The next bit of coverage reads, Clash of the Titans, quote unquote. US is marching towards war with China, according to a political analyst. The next headline reads, US and China could come together on climate after historic deal. China is a threat to Australia is the next headline, with China rising host Peter Stefanovic saying China is a threat to Australia. The next headline reads, Australians need to know whether Labour will be grand appeasers of China. Liberal MP Nicole Flint says Australians need to know whether the party will be grand appeasers of China if they are elected next year. The next headline reads, Sky News presents 2-part documentary China Rising tonight at 8 p.m. as China-Australian relations rise to unprecedented levels of discord. Sky News anchor and investigative journalist Peter Stefanovic presents. Relating to the US, the next article's headline reads, China and the US virtual meeting shows they've decided to stabilize the relationship. Lowy Institute Senior Fellow Richard McGregor states. Moving along, China is certainly preparing for something, says China Rising host Peter Stefanovich. The next headline reads, China and Russia demonstrated newfound strength by refusing to attend COP26 or COP26. China and the US had been setting expectations low ahead of virtual meeting. ESPI's Peter Jennings says he thinks both the leaders of China and US have been setting expectations low ahead of their virtual conference. We move along to the next headline, which is entitled, Joe Biden agrees in many regards with Mike Pompeo over China. The next article reads, Pacific could become indebted to China if Australia withdraws foreign aid. The next piece is related to defense and foreign affairs. AUKUS to fast-track technologies. AUKUS to fast-track technologies to counter China's large-scale investment. The next article headline reads, Biden warns China he will be firm on Taiwan. US President Joe Biden has warned Chinese leader Xi Jinping that he will remain firm on defending Taiwan. The next headline reads, Republican Senator Marco Rubio blocks Joe Biden's nominee for ambassador to China. And next, the threat from China is real. Gleason. Sky News Queensland editor Peter Gleason says, what is great about Australia is our ability to ensure we've got the right technology and
tonight, Chris Smith. Of course,
the government should be applauded for this. The next headline, China playing the Biden administration for fools on climate policy. And this is followed by, threat of modern China will play an important role in next election. The next headline reads, Biden-Xi summit cooled tensions between US and China. We move along to the next piece. US generals chilling China warning. This is followed by a piece by Andrew Bolt. Something serious is going on in China amid Peng Shuai's disappearance. We've got to stand up to China, former Labour MP, is the next headline. We move on to window of opportunity for China to act on Taiwan could close. Followed by China has become far more aggressive since Keating was Prime Minister. Be prepared to sacrifice, the Global Times editor's dire message for Australia. The next headline reads, Australia warned of a quote-unquote heavy attack from China if it helps the United States defend Taiwan from China. The next piece relates to China rising. Preview to the Sky News Australia documentary. Ever since Xi Jinping became China's president, the regime has become more authoritarian. We move on to the next headline, and it states, China lodges complaint against Liberal Senator. China has not taken too kindly to Liberal Senator James Paterson briefing European politicians about how Australia has stood up to Beijing. The next headline reads, China's propaganda mouthpiece threatens heavy attack, quote unquote, on Australian troops. China's propaganda machine has threatened military action towards Australian troops, declaring it would be a nightmare for them, quote unquote, if Canberra mounted a defense of Taiwan. The next piece relates to the US, and the headline reads, Biden to hold Taiwan talks with China. And this is followed by a headline that reads, Mike Pompeo blasts rogue Chinese regime for its goal of global domination. The next piece comes from former Trump Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney. Biden must prove his presidential competence to Xi Jinping. This former Chief of Staff for the Trump administration warns the US-China relationship will further disintegrate if President Joe Biden fails to show Chinese leader Xi Jinping he's capable of doing the job of president. We move on to the next piece, which is headlined by, it was really important the leaders of China and the US were able to talk to one another. And this is followed by a piece with the headline, New Technologies Investment to Combat China's Authoritarian Developments. A look at the Morrison government's pledge to invest $100 million into new defense technologies as a strategic action to combat China's authoritarian developments. The next piece is headlined, Virtually no talk of repairing relationship between China and US in virtual meeting. According to University of Melbourne's Professor Michael Wesley. The next article relates to the United States, and the headline reads, China and US unveil mutual agreement to ease restrictions on journalists. This is preceded by asking university chiefs to counter Chinese threats in Australian universities is a tall order. Switching attention to sport, the WTA threatens to cancel events in China if they don't hear from missing tennis player, with former world number 1 tennis player Serena Williams, the latest star from the sport, calling for investigation into the whereabouts of Peng Shuai, who went missing after she accused a Chinese politician of sexual assault. The next piece is an opinion piece entitled, It would be an extraordinary step for China to attack the US over Taiwan. And this comes from a former Australian defense head of China analysis, Paul Monk. We land over here at the final mention of China from Sky News, from the range of dates, the 15th of November to the 21st of November, with the UN, the WTA, pressuring China after Peng Shuai's mysterious disappearance. So there we go, everybody. Instances of China represented in Sky News, alongside instances of Australia represented in the Global Times. The score for this week, 17 mentions from the Global Times of Australia and 84 mentions of China from Sky News Australia. Please stick around for more content. We will be coming back in a week's time with yet another scan of Australia Chinese news coverage, specifically and particularly looking at these Fox News analogs. So from the Chinese end of things, the Global Times, and from the Australian side of things, Sky News. Thank you very much indeed for your time. This is Australia China Media Watch signing off.